Hey everyone, tonight we dive into the unexpectedly eventful and at times downright absurd daily lives of Paleolithic humans. So, what were cavemen really doing all day? Spoiler, it wasn't just smashing rocks and discovering fire in dramatic montages. But before we get too cozy, do me a quick favor, hit the like button and subscribe only if you're genuinely into this kind of content. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is on your end. I love seeing how far this little community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft ambient hum, and let's slowly slip into tonight's journey. A typical day in the life of a caveman began around sunrise, sometimes even earlier, depending on whether the wind was howling or someone nearby decided to have a coughing fit. Most people slept on animal hides or directly on the dirt, maybe with a little cushioning of dried grass or leaves if they were lucky. And yes, they slept close to the fire, not for the vibe, but for warmth and to keep bugs and predators at bay. Sleeping alone? Not really an option. You likely wake up minus a limb. People usually huddle close, families, extended kin, and anyone else in their group. Forget privacy. Everyone heard everything. The first chore of the day? Check the fire. If it had gone out overnight, someone had to get it going again, which meant patience, stick rubbing, and frustration. If it was cold, which it often was, tempers ran short until those flames returned. Next up was inspecting tools and weapons, spears, knives, scrapers, basically anything that could help hunt, protect, or process food and skins. These had to stay in good shape. Losing or damaging your tools meant no food, no defense, and a lot of stress. Some folks were naturals with tools, and borrowing was common, but not free. You owed them. Kids were usually the first to stir, looking for food or something to keep them busy, often both. Adults slowly roused themselves, starting their day by collecting water, checking traps, or scouting for animals. There was no lounging around. Every moment counted. The day's mission was basic. Stay warm, get fed, don't get hurt. If you woke up whole, your fire was still burning, and nothing nearby wanted to eat you, you were doing just fine. Hygiene, surprisingly, was a thing, just not the way we know it. Cleanliness had a purpose, mostly practical. You cleaned yourself when dirt got in the way of functioning, or when the stench bothered the group. Bathing happened, but mostly when there was water nearby and it wasn't freezing. Streams were ideal. Otherwise, cleaning meant wiping down with leaves, sand, or, weirdly enough, animal fat. Odd as it sounds, the fat actually helped with warmth and bug repellent. Teeth? No toothbrushes, but people chewed sticks or bones to keep them clean. Toothware was common thanks to tough meat, unprocessed grains, and grit from stone-ground food. Cavities? Rare, no sugar. Tooth loss? Not so rare, from injury or wear. Hair was left long, tied back, or ignored. Lice were a problem. Some used ash, dirt, or animal oils to keep them in check. Others just scratched and hoped for the best. Primitive combs have been found from later times, so grooming did evolve. Clothing didn't help the smell either. Animal hides weren't breathable, rarely washed, and stank. If it got bad, people either got used to it or blamed the person hogging the fire. Feet were bare or wrapped in hide shoes, think rugged, prehistoric flip-flops. And yes, prehistoric homes had their own signature funk. But here's the wild part. Early humans adapted. Their immune systems were strong, and their communities understood just enough about cleanliness to avoid disease outbreaks. Everyone likely smelled similar anyway, unless you rolled in a dead animal, which some did for camouflage. Breakfast had no set time or menu. You ate what was left, if anything. A strip of dried meat hanging over the fire? You struck gold. More often, it was a bust. If there was no leftover food, you had to forage. Dig up roots, check for berries, or scavenge for edible plants before animals, or kids, got to them. Season mattered. Spring brought greens, summer meant fruit, and winter brought hunger. Protein? Unpredictable. Birds, rabbits, insects, whatever you could catch. Insects were reliable, if unappetizing. Termite mounds and grubs were breakfast staples. They didn't taste great, but at least they didn't fight back. Sharing wasn't guaranteed. If someone brought food, they were generous, in charge, or both. Food was survival, not a favor. Water was next. Streams and springs were ideal. Puddles were sometimes the only choice. Boiling water wasn't common yet, so most drank it raw, bacteria and all. Sometimes your gut handled it. Sometimes it didn't. If lucky, there might be leftovers from past hunts, smoked meat, bone marrow, or hide strips technically edible with enough chewing. These were hidden away or hung up high. Didn't always stop a determined kid with a stick. Each morning was a gamble. Maybe berries and a half-roasted squirrel. Maybe nothing. But no one skipped breakfast by choice. After eating, or not, came tool maintenance. Tools weren't extras. They were lifelines. Without a good blade, you couldn't process food or protect yourself. A lot of time was spent hunched over stones, shaping tools by smashing other stones. It was art, trial and error, and risk to your thumbs. Preferred materials? Flint or obsidian if you lived near a volcano. These chipped in predictable ways, allowing sharp edges to be shaped into scrapers, spearheads, axes, even basic handles. Every tool had a job, some for butchering, some for woodworking, some for who knows what. Most made their own, but some were better than others. A person who could craft a flawless spear tip was admired and constantly asked for help. Edges had to stay sharp. Dull tools were useless and risky. Stones were ground, chipped, tested daily. Sometimes you'd spend hours making a tool that broke in minutes. No whining. You just started over. Toolkits were valuable, traded, inherited, or even stolen. Lose yours, and you weren't just embarrassed. You were in real danger. Something with claws would always show up when you were empty-handed. Creative minds tied rocks to sticks with sinew and called it a hammer. Others used bones for fine tasks, lightweight and flexible. These early breakthroughs planted the seeds of future tech, even if they started from trying to butcher lunch faster. Once the tools were set, and the food or lack of it sorted, it was time for the big task, hunting. Hunting wasn't a solo job. It was a team effort, involving everyone who could move, and one guy who just yelled directions like, "That's not a deer." Big game was the prize: mammoths, bison, wild horses. Enough meat to feed the group for a week. But it came with danger. Mammoths didn't pose politely for your spear. They were fast, heavy, and absolutely not interested in your wooden stick collection. Hunts required planning. Scouts tracked herds. Others prepped traps, pits covered with branches, choke points near water, or cliffs if the group was feeling brave. Then came the ambush. Shouting, spear throwing, chasing. You hoped the animal went down before one of your people did. Small game deer, boars, rabbits was easier but still unpredictable. Spears, clubs, and traps were the usual approach. But mistakes happened. Small game, deer, boars, rabbits was easier but still unpredictable. Spears, clubs, and traps were the usual approach. But mistakes happened. One misstep, and you were sprinting after a wild pig, yelling explanations to your very unimpressed group. Daily life in the Paleolithic era. There were moments when everything seemed to go according to plan. Sometimes the hunters returned triumphantly, dragging back meat, bones, and stories of conquest. Other times, they came home bruised, empty-handed, and full of excuses. The wind changed, became a favorite line, along with blaming whoever had the bad luck to sneeze during the ambush. In Paleolithic society, meat wasn't just nourishment, it was prestige. The one who landed the fatal blow often claimed the best cut, earned more respect, and could count on doing fewer chores for the night. Still, sharing was a must. Social bonds mattered, and hoarding meat only led to tense silences around the fire. Hunting wasn't just a necessity for survival. It required coordination, bravery, and on-the-fly planning, all while doing your best not to be crushed by a furious animal. Of course, not every Paleolithic person joined the big hunts. Many focused on a different, more reliable task, gathering food that didn't try to kill you. Foraging lacked the drama of chasing mammoths, but was equally vital and often more productive. You might not catch a deer, but you had a good shot at spotting a berry bush. The foraging team, usually women, elders, and kids too young for spear throwing, scanned the land for edible plants, berries, roots, seeds, nuts, and mushrooms. Success hinged on experience and knowledge passed down through generations. Trial and error taught harsh lessons, sometimes ending in tragedy. Foragers memorized landscapes, recalling which valleys yielded tubers, which trees dropped the best nuts, and which plants were deceptive and deadly. This wisdom was treasured and carefully passed on, as a single mistake could turn lunch into disaster. Foraging wasn't always safe or simple. Wild animals also competed for food. Squirrels, birds, even bears might beat you to a bush, and grabbing honey from a tree could lead to a wasp ambush no one wanted to repeat. Meanwhile, foragers collected other useful items like firewood, feathers, medicinal herbs, and bark. Children learned by doing, occasionally attempting to snack on things they shouldn't. Supervising them meant watching for both danger and distraction, like the ongoing debate about whether a mushroom looked off this time. Though it lacked flair, forage food was dependable. Plants don't run. Nuts don't bite. On a good day, one haul could feed the group multiple times. When hunting failed, it was the gatherers who filled bellies. If there was one force that made life even slightly manageable, it was fire. Fire cooked meals, provided heat, kept predators at bay, and illuminated dark nights. Losing it? Catastrophic. That's why every group had a silent agreement. Never let the fire go out. Someone, often an unlucky one that day, got fire duty. They tended the flames, fed it fuel, and stressed when the wind gusted or the embers dimmed. It wasn't glorious work, but it was vital. Missing breakfast or botching a hunt was tolerable. Letting the fire die? That was a crisis. Starting fire from scratch required skill, patience, and dry materials. Cold hands or damp wood meant hours of work, just to coax an ember to life. Most bands tried to keep one flame burning at all times, even while traveling. Some carried live embers wrapped in moss or bark to preserve the spark. Fire upkeep included collecting fuel, dry branches, dung, and anything flammable. Kids helped, though they sometimes brought back wet logs or odd, inedible fungi. Still, maintaining fire had its social element. It was the hub of communal life. People sat around it to talk, eat, and settle disputes about who was on watch duty. The fire pit served as the tribe's living room, a warm place to unwind after a rough day. But if it went out, there were no medals for past diligence. Only glares and someone muttering, "Guess who's making sparks tonight?" Not everyone in prehistoric times lived in caves. While caves offered natural protection and were ideal if unclaimed, they weren't always available. Many people built their own shelters instead. Building a Paleolithic home was all about utility. No blueprints, no engineers. Just a goal: block the wind, stay dry, and survive. In regions without caves, huts were crafted from wood, bone, mud, grass, whatever was on hand. A frame of branches or mammoth bones got tied together with sinew or vines, then layered with hides, bark, or dirt. The outcome? A leaning shelter that was slightly better than standing in the open. Constructing these huts was a team job. One person held things in place, another tied, and a third offered helpful commentary. If it collapsed, no one was shocked. You rebuilt, maybe with more sticks this time. Weather was a constant obstacle. Rain turned floors into sludge. Wind tore off coverings like nature throwing tantrums. Snow flattened roofs unless reinforced. To cope, some groups created seasonal homes, lighter shelters for summer and sturdier, more insulated ones for winter. If you were lucky, hides lined the floor and walls. If not, you bundled up and grumbled. The fire stayed in the center with a smoke hole above, though this also invited drafts. Furniture was minimal. A rock to sit on, hides to sleep on, and maybe a dry corner counted as luxury. Yet despite the rough materials, people managed to construct functioning homes. They weren't elegant, but they kept you dry-ish and upright during storms. Parenting during this era was intense. No books, no guides, no stroller. Once a child arrived, the mission was clear. Keep this small, loud, fragile creature alive in a world full of predators and danger without misplacing your spear. Childbirth itself was risky. If both mother and baby survived, the next challenge was raising a child who insisted on crawling toward every fire, cliff, or poisonous berry they could find. There were no diapers. Infants were swaddled in hides or fibrous plants. You learned fast to set them down on rocks for easy cleanup. Mothers breastfed for years. There was no formula, and nobody wanted to pre-chew meat for a toddler. Discipline was practical. If a child wandered near a cliff, you didn't lecture them. You yanked them back and said something firm like, no fall. Safety rules were taught on the fly. Touching fire, chasing wolves, or tasting strange mushrooms were all considered teachable moments, ideally before disaster. Still, Paleolithic parenting had its joys. Kids played constantly, with sticks, bugs, feathers, and anything else they found. Play was education. A kid who loved throwing stones might grow up to be a hunter. A quiet observer might become a healer or shaman. No one asked, "What do you want to be?" You became what you could based on skill and luck. Older children pitched in, gathering wood, fetching water, or scaring birds away from meat. By age 10, they were considered semi-functional tribe members, still noisy, but finally helpful. There were no schools. Kids learned by copying adults, doing tasks, and getting muddy. Toys didn't exist, just nature, which came with no warnings or instructions. Evenings brought a touch of peace. After a day of work, parenting, and near-death experiences, early humans gathered around the fire. Paleolithic social life wasn't glamorous, no wine tastings or gossip brunches, but it mattered. The fire was the heart of camp. When daylight faded and you could barely see your feet, everyone circled the flames. It wasn't a celebration. It was just the only safe, warm place to be. Evening talk wasn't about trivial things. People shared stories, exaggerated the day's events, or passed down legends about ancestors, spirits, or comical hunting fails. Storytelling wasn't just fun. It taught survival skills, cultural memory, and life lessons, all wrapped in dramatic gestures and sound effects. Music and dancing appeared too. Someone might start tapping stones. Another would hum or chant. Kids spun in circles because no one told them not to. Instruments were bones, drums, or anything that sounded good when hit. Bragging was common. A successful hunter would mention it several times. A toolmaker would casually display their creation while pretending not to care. Status wasn't about wealth, it was about ability. Who hunted well, who led wisely, who kept the fire going. Flirting? It existed. With limited options, romance was subtle. Sharing food, sitting close, or not laughing at someone's mistake were all signs of interest. Courtship was simple and effort-based, not poetic. Living in a small band of 20 to 40 people meant your dating pool was limited to whoever wasn't family or already paired up. Still, connections formed. Romance meant action, offering meat, helping with chores, showing survival skill. Clothes were all fur and grime, so appearance mattered less than ability. Long-term bonds formed through teamwork, raising kids, facing winter, sharing duties. And if things didn't work out, you drifted apart. No paperwork. Just fewer chores shared, and a little more space around the fire. Even relationships were shaped by survival. Some anthropologists believe Paleolithic love was more flexible than in later eras. Social roles, mobility, and the need to stay alive shaped how people loved and lived, more than jealousy ever did. Survival instincts and constant movement often influenced how Paleolithic people formed and maintained relationships, far more than jealousy or emotional attachment. There were no love songs echoing across the plains, only quiet companionship, shared warmth under the same high blanket, and the unspoken agreement that neither of them wanted to face predators alone. It may not fit modern ideals of romance, but it served its purpose. Paleolithic couples raised children, weathered storms, and built a life together without ever arguing over unwashed dishes, because there simply were none. Amid all the challenges of hunting, gathering, and staying alive, humans still carved out time for something uniquely their own: art. They had no museums, exhibitions, or critics mumbling about abstraction. What they did have were expansive cave walls, cold, silent, and begging for creativity. Some of the oldest cave art, dating back over 30,000 years, has been found in sites like Lascaux and Chauvet in modern-day France. These were not random scribbles. The paintings showcased animals, bison, deer, horses, and mammoths, drawn with remarkable accuracy and even a sense of motion. Some images featured movement lines, handprints, and patterns of dots or symbols whose meanings remain a mystery today. The tools used? Simple. Natural pigments such as charcoal, ochre, and manganese, combined with water, animal fat, or even saliva. For application, early artists used fingers, sticks, chewed plants, or hollow bones to spray pigment across hands, stencil onto walls, an ancient precursor to modern airbrushing. Why did they paint? No one truly knows. Theories range from spiritual expression and storytelling to hunting rituals or simple aesthetic enjoyment. Some researchers believe these images may have been intended to improve hunting success or share essential knowledge about animal behavior. The artists often work deep within caves, far from where people actually live, suggesting the motivation was purely expressive, not practical or economic. Children may have participated too. Small handprints are preserved in some sites, hinting that even the youngest members of the tribe left their mark, literally. While we'll never know who first painted a galloping bison, it's easy to imagine someone behind them offering encouragement or unsolicited advice. The fact that these artworks have outlived bones and shelter speaks volumes. Long after fire pits crumbled and huts disintegrated, the bison still run, sketched in ochre on the cave walls, a lasting symbol that humans have always needed to express themselves. Getting sick or injured in the Paleolithic world was like rolling dice with fate, and those dice were chipped and rarely kind. No doctors, no antibiotics, no clinics. If you suffered a wound, caught an illness, or simply felt unwell, the best outcome was that your immune system managed to sort it out. The worst? Your friends circled the fire with worried eyes, hoping it wasn't contagious. Medical knowledge did exist, albeit basic. People likely discovered that certain plants reduced pain or swelling, chewing bark, using crushed herbs, or boiling roots. For example, willow bark contains salicylic acid, the natural basis of modern aspirin, which means someone, somewhere, found pain relief by gnawing on a tree. Wounds were typically washed with water or natural antiseptics, then wrapped in moss or animal hide and monitored. Infections, not the injuries themselves, were often fatal. No antiseptics, no sterile gauze. If it turned red, swelled, or began to smell, that was bad news. Fractures sometimes healed, sometimes didn't. Archaeological evidence shows some people lived long enough to recover from broken limbs, suggesting rest and support were part of care. But others clearly kept moving on damaged bones because there was no alternative. Tooth problems were common. Their diet, full of gritty roots and tough meat, wore down teeth. Cavities were rare, but decay and jaw infections did occur. And the cure? Tooth removal, by hand, with a rock, and zero anesthesia. Some tribes had spiritual healers or shamans who blended herbal remedies with rituals and chants. These early caregivers served as doctors, priests, and the bravest souls willing to handle pus and blood. It wasn't scientific, but it was better than nothing. In truth, Paleolithic medicine was all about improvisation. Sometimes it helped, sometimes it didn't. You got rest, care, and a touch of luck. If not, your place by the fire was quickly passed to someone stronger. As for movement, forget wagons or roads. Travel meant walking. If you wanted to go somewhere, you used your legs. Whether relocating camp, pursuing migrating animals, or simply escaping nearby neighbors with sticky fingers, mobility was part of life. Paleolithic people were nomadic. Seasonal change, food supply, and social reasons all drove group migrations. Camps weren't permanent. When resources dried up or danger grew, the tribe packed up and moved. Journeys ranged from short hikes to epic treks across entire regions. Everything was carried: weapons, food, tools, fire-making supplies, children. There were no suitcases, just leather bags or reed-woven baskets. Travel exposed you to harsh weather, rain, wind, snow, sometimes all at once. Children cried, adults limped, yet everyone kept going. Navigation relied on memory, star positions, and natural landmarks. The mountain shaped like a bear, or the bend in the river that smells bad, were the ancient equivalents of road signs. Group movement required order. Scouts checked ahead. The rest moved cautiously. Injuries slowed everyone down. Sudden storms meant immediate shelter. You couldn't get lost. Being separated often meant death. Still, people managed to migrate across continents. Archaeological findings show Paleolithic humans traveled incredible distances on foot, driven by survival and curiosity. No GPS, no maps, no bottled water, just a relentless will to discover what lay beyond the horizon. At day's end, after miles walked, tools repaired, children herded, and meals scraped together, early humans returned to the fire. Sunlight faded quickly, and with no torches or lamps, True darkness settled fast. The fire became the center of everything. Dinner, if it happened, meant roasted meat, cooked roots, or whatever hadn't run away that morning. People gathered in a loose circle, eating with hands, sticks, or whatever worked. There were no table manners, but certain rules existed. Don't grab the last bite unless you earned it. After eating, the night turned reflective. Stories flowed, not just entertainment, but education. Fables, family legends, and survival tips passed mouth to mouth, keeping history alive. These tales exaggerated for effect and probably added flair to each person's hunting success. Music followed, rhythmic chants, stone tapping, bones turned flutes. Children danced, spun in circles, or banged rocks together. It wasn't professional. It wasn't supposed to be, but it kept the dark at bay a little longer. By this time, exhaustion set in. Children collapsed into high piles. Adults sat quietly, watching the flames. Someone always checked the fire, feeding it, shielding it, muttering at the wind. If they forgot, you can bet they'd be assigned fire-starting duty at dawn. Thus ended another day in the Paleolithic world, filled with danger, resilience, creativity, and connection. A world without comfort, but never without meaning. The Manhattan Project and its legacy. Electromagnetic separation was one of the methods used, through devices known as collutrons, to enrich uranium. Thousands of workers, the majority of them women, operated complex machinery without any understanding of what it was for. Unknowingly, they were contributing to the creation of nuclear bomb fuel. A third key site in the project was Hanford, Washington, where plutonium was manufactured. Plutonium didn't exist in usable forms naturally, but massive nuclear reactors, built in remote areas, bombarded uranium to produce it. This plutonium was then extracted, refined, and shipped to Los Alamos to be transformed into a weapon. These reactors ran nonstop, producing not only a new element, but also the first environmental consequences of the atomic age: radiation leaks and contamination. The Manhattan Project was enormous. More than 130,000 people were involved, a number larger than the population of some U.S. states at the time. Secret towns sprang up with houses, schools, shops, and heavy security. Mail was censored, phone calls monitored. Workers were told only what they needed to know. Vice President Harry Truman himself didn't learn about the project until he became president. This wasn't just science, it was military, industrial, bureaucratic, and deeply human. People fell in love, had children, suffered accidents, got bored, and died, all while unknowingly building a weapon they couldn't name. It became a hidden America, inching toward crafting the most devastating weapon in history. Robert Oppenheimer wasn't a typical defense contractor or even a typical scientist. He was brilliant, erratic, aristocratic, and philosophical. Fluent in 6 languages, quoting the Bhagavad Gita, and chain smoking, Oppenheimer had a sharp wit, fragile health, and a talent for solving unsolvable problems. To many, he was more poet than physicist, but he was also the glue that held Los Alamos together. Appointed by General Groves as the scientific director of the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer quickly proved he wasn't just an academic. He had people skills and a keen sense of politics. He inspired loyalty and managed egos, an achievement when surrounded by Nobel-level minds. Yet he had a controversial past. Connections to the Communist Party through his brother and mistress, Jean Tatlock, raised concerns. Military intelligence flagged him, but Groves pushed forward, trusting his value. Oppenheimer's skill in translating theoretical physics into real-world applications made him indispensable. He led the team with charisma and relentless energy, often sleeping only a few hours, dashing between chalkboards, meetings, and cigarette breaks. He was involved in every detail: bomb geometry, casing, neutron reflection, even seating arrangements at meetings. While he believed beating the Nazis to the bomb was morally justified, as Germany's defeat neared and their nuclear ambitions collapsed, his feelings changed. The bomb wasn't just a defense tool, it was becoming political. This duality haunted him. He had assembled history's greatest minds to create an unthinkable weapon. Each breakthrough brought them closer to a boundary that, once crossed, couldn't be undone. Publicly, he stayed focused. Privately, he wrestled with the implications the designs were finalizing. One haunting realization became inescapable: they weren't just altering war, they were redefining power. By the end of 1944, ideas had turned into blueprints, blueprints into parts, and parts into fully assembled components. The Manhattan Project had shifted from theory to full-scale production. But building an atomic bomb was nothing like making a tank or plane. Everything was uncharted territory. Los Alamos engineers and scientists worked on two bomb types. The first was a uranium device, nicknamed Little Boy. It functioned like a gun. One uranium-235 piece was fired into another to create a chain reaction. Conceptually simple, but terrifying in reality. Uranium came in painstakingly small quantities from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They needed over 60 kilograms. Every equation had to be perfect. There would be no test run. Little Boy would go straight into combat. The second bomb, Fat Man, used plutonium. But plutonium posed problems. A gun-type mechanism wouldn't work. It would prematurely detonate. So scientists developed an implosion design. Symmetrical explosive lenses would compress the plutonium core into critical mass in microseconds. Imagine trying to crush a steel sphere with dynamite from all directions without cracking it unevenly. Plutonium was also highly toxic and unstable, an entirely new material. Work was secretive and stressful. Accidents occurred. In 1945, physicist Harry Daghlian dropped a tungsten brick into a plutonium core by mistake. It triggered a critical reaction. He received a lethal radiation dose and died. Months later, the same core killed physicist Louis Slotin in a nearly identical accident. They called it the Demon Core. Progress came at a price: physical, mental, moral. Germany had surrendered, but Japan fought on, and the U.S. demanded results. The bombs near completion, yet few at Los Alamos knew their targets or who would die. The final parts came together: metal shells, precise detonators, and nuclear cores, all scientific marvels. Only one task remained: testing. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m., the first nuclear bomb was detonated in the New Mexico desert. Codenamed Trinity, it marked the dawn of the atomic age. The test bomb was a plutonium implosion device, same as Fat Man. It had never been tested before. Unlike Little Boy, which relied on simpler physics, Fat Man's implosion was complex and unpredictable. Oppenheimer, Groves, and hundreds of scientists observed from miles away. Many wore welding goggles. Some smeared on sunscreen, hoping it would help. A few even joked it might ignite the atmosphere. They weren't entirely sure. Then it happened. A blinding flash brighter than the sun. The shockwave knocked people down. The heat was felt more than 10 miles away. A 40,000-foot mushroom cloud soared. The desert trembled. One witness said it felt like the birth of the world. Another compared it to hell opening. Oppenheimer didn't cheer. He whispered, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The test was terrifyingly successful. America now held a weapon that could annihilate a city in seconds. A moral reckoning began. Photos were taken. Glass like sand, trinitite, formed at the blast site. But what stayed with people wasn't data. It was silence and the sense that something irreversible had begun. Truman, in Germany at the Potsdam Conference, was informed, "The baby is born." Japan had not yet surrendered. The question wasn't whether to use the bomb, it was where and when. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay departed Tinian Island carrying Little Boy. The target, Hiroshima, a military city, but full of civilians. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb was released. 43 seconds later, Hiroshima exploded. The city vanished. Temperatures hit 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. 70,000 died instantly. Firestorm spread. Survivors wandered, burned and blinded. In the following weeks, tens of thousands more died from radiation, injuries, and trauma. Humanity had never witnessed such destruction. Yet, Japan didn't surrender immediately. Some leaders wanted to continue. Others wavered. The U.S., seeing hesitation, planned a second strike. On August 9th, another B-29, Boxcar, dropped Fat Man over Nagasaki. The first target, Kokura, was obscured by clouds. Nagasaki's terrain reduced the impact somewhat, but 40,000 died instantly. Once again, flames and radiation took thousands more. The Japanese Emperor Hirohito finally spoke directly to his people, announcing unconditional surrender. The war was over, but controversy had just begun. Were the bombings necessary, or a gruesome display of power? Some scientists urged a demonstration instead of city attacks. Their advice was ignored. The bomb ended the war militarily, but ethically, spiritually, and philosophically, the questions would never end. Two flashes of light divided the 20th century. There was a world before the bomb and a world after. At Los Alamos, the mood was somber. The bomb worked. The war ended. But the destruction shocked even the builders. Photographs of burned victims reached labs. Survivor stories followed. Scientists, once proud, now felt dread. Oppenheimer was devastated. At a meeting with President Truman, he confessed, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman was furious. He later called him a crybaby scientist. But it wasn't just Oppenheimer. Leo Szilard and others petitioned for international control of nuclear arms. They warned secrecy and unchecked arsenals would lead to disaster. Their warnings went unheeded. The Atomic Energy Commission was created. The Cold War simmered. Unknown to the U.S. government, the Manhattan Project had already been infiltrated. Soviet spies like Klaus Fuchs had been sending detailed bomb designs to Moscow. Fuchs's intelligence shaped the Soviet bomb. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were accused of passing secrets to the USSR. Their 1953 execution was one of Cold War America's most controversial moments. Traitors or scapegoats? The debate continues. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its own bomb. America's monopoly had lasted less than 5 years. The nuclear arms race began. Conflict now meant mutual annihilation. No longer about soldiers, it was about who could destroy the world faster. Fear gripped the U.S. loyalty tests. Background checks. Red Scare hearings followed. Scientists once hailed as heroes were blacklisted. Even Oppenheimer lost his security clearance. The Manhattan Project had won a war, but unleashed a new kind of danger, cold, psychological, and endlessly perilous. By 1946, the Manhattan Project officially ended, but its effects did not. It reshaped science, politics, and morality. It proved pure research could change history. Nuclear physics birthed energy, medicine, and space technology, but also a sword of unimaginable power. And it cast a permanent shadow. For the first time, humanity could end itself. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction defined Cold War diplomacy. Peace became a fragile balance, not of goodwill, but of terror. The bomb inspired global proliferation. The US, USSR, Britain, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel unofficially, and North Korea. What began as a race to stop Hitler became a model for militarization. Remarkably, the bomb has only been used in war twice. Perhaps its horror is what has prevented its reuse. Culturally, the Manhattan Project haunted film, literature, and philosophy. It forced us to confront science's limits. Could knowledge exist without responsibility? Figures like Oppenheimer became symbols of that struggle, not heroes or villains, but humans. In 1965, he reflected, in some sort of crude sense which no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can quite extinguish, the physicists have known sin. That remains the Manhattan Project's legacy. Brilliance and burden, forever intertwined, each legacy of the Manhattan Project and ancient civilization's fashion. The Manhattan Project's legacy lives on, not just in the vast arsenals of nuclear weapons still stockpiled around the world, but also in the non-proliferation treaties, the policy of deterrence, and the uneasy peace that comes from nuclear fear. While the atomic bomb helped bring World War II to an end, it also gave birth to something new, a fragile and permanent era in which the fate of humanity could rest on a single push of a button. In ancient Mesopotamia, clothing went far beyond modesty. It was a declaration of identity. Garments revealed a person's class, profession, gender, and even their closeness to the divine. Fashion operated as a complex social language enforced from kings to slaves. Early civilizations like Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria developed detailed dress codes. For men, attire varied from plain wool or flax skirts to intricate layered robes, symbols of influence and wealth. Nobles and royalty often wore dyed cloaks in rich reds, purples, and indigos, colors reserved for the elite due to their rarity and cost. Women's clothing also signified social standing. Wealthy women draped themselves in diagonally wrapped gowns, frequently bearing one shoulder with decorative fringes along the hems. Jewelry was crucial. Gold chains, lapis lazuli earrings, and carnelian beads served both aesthetic and symbolic purposes, often tied to divinity or lineage. Bracelets, anklets, and hair adornments communicated spiritual beliefs and marital status. Grooming, too, was coded. Men took immense pride in their meticulously styled beards, often curled and treated with oils. For women, elaborate buns, braids, and wigs reflected social sophistication. Perfumes and cosmetics, oils scented with myrrh or cedar, and eye makeup made from coal, were worn for beauty, sun protection, and to guard against evil spirits. Footwear was minimal. Many went barefoot, though elites sometimes donned ornate leather or silver sandals for ceremonial purposes. In Mesopotamia, fashion was functional and symbolic, deeply intertwined with politics and religion. Appearance could elevate or diminish you. People understood even then that how you dressed could shape your fate. In ancient Egypt, fashion carried divine significance. Clothing wasn't just about wealth or style. It embodied purity, power, and eternal readiness. Life and the afterlife were interwoven, and your wardrobe had to serve both realms. In Rome, fashion was power, law, spectacle, and identity wrapped in fabric. Clothing was tightly regulated and unmistakably stratified. The toga, Rome's most iconic garment, was reserved for male citizens. Massive and complex, it signified status through color and trim: plain white for citizens, purple bordered for magistrates, and gold embroidered purple for emperors. Wearing the wrong toga could lead to disgrace. Beneath the toga, men wore tunics. Slaves had rough, undyed versions. Freedmen had striped ones. Senators had a purple stripe called the latus clavis. Roman women wore the stola, a long dress signifying virtue, along with the palla, a head-covering shawl. Prostitutes were forbidden from wearing the stola, reinforcing a moral divide. Jewelry was abundant. Rings, brooches, necklaces, and ornate hairstyles were common, especially among women. Footwear ranged from sandals to color-coded boots. Even shoes marked your station. Senators wore black, lace calci. To dress properly was to obey Rome's ideals, hierarchy, discipline, and conquest. In the Achaemenid Persian Empire, clothing was a stage for grandeur. Kings like Darius and Xerxes dressed not just to impress, but to inspire awe. Persian attire was richly embroidered with silk, gold thread, and mythological symbols. Tunics with trousers, a rare innovation, combined fashion with practicality, influencing future civilizations. Nobles wore long-sleeve garments, cinched by ornate belts. Cloaks layered over the shoulders added drama and formality. Women's dresses featured bodices, flowing sleeves, and veils. Both sexes adorned themselves with gold, gems, and perfume. Cosmetics like kohl, rouge, and scented oils were stored in carved containers. Headwear was critical. The tiara or caries, tall and decorated, marked royalty. Even lower-ranking courtiers wore embroidered turbans or caps. Colors also had meaning. Blues and purples denoted royalty. White symbolized purity. Red and gold represented fire, a sacred element in Zoroastrianism. Every thread conveyed divine order and loyalty to the throne. In ancient India, clothing was deeply spiritual, crafted for harmony with the universe. From the Vedic period through the Mauryan and Gupta eras, fashion merged sacred thought with climate and ritual. The cornerstone was unstitched cloth. Tailoring was often avoided in ritual attire. Men wore the dhoti, wrapped and tied differently by caste or region. Priests folded it specifically for ceremonies. Women wore the sari, often up to 9 yards long. It left the midriff bare, not for allure, but to express fertility and openness to the cosmos. The kolai blouse came later. In many regions, women wore the sari without it. Shawls were added in colder areas. India's textile mastery was unmatched. Cotton, fine muslin called woven air, and vibrant silks flourished. Block printing and resist dyeing created colorful patterns. Jewelry had astrological, spiritual, and marital significance. Bangles, anklets, nose rings, and amulets were worn from childhood. Fashion was philosophical, layered with symbolic meaning. In ancient China, attire was a reflection of ethics, cosmic balance, and social order. From the Shang to the Han dynasty, fashion served as a visual code for harmony with the emperor and the universe. From Mesopotamian robes that whispered of status and survival to Indian saris woven with sacred geometry, ancient fashion was never just about covering the body. It was an expression of a civilization's soul, worn, seen, and passed down like living scripture. Each thread told a story of gods and kings, of duty and beauty, of identity and belief. Clothing marked the line between purity and corruption, freedom and servitude, life and afterlife. It declared who you were without saying a word. And while fabrics faded, the meaning behind them endured. In temples and tombs, carvings and scrolls, we still glimpse the patterns and drapes that once defined entire empires. And though the world has changed, one truth remains. What we wear shapes how we are seen, and sometimes how we see ourselves. In the ancient world, fashion wasn't just fabric. It was language. It was law. It was legacy.